guys. I'm so happy to be here because we're going to be talking about technology in classrooms and technology in schools. And to do that, I'm going to take you right inside one, right now, right here.
Innovation starts, and you work and get better at it. But as you can hear, it's quiet. All students are working. All students are doing things at their own pace. Computers. And when they finish, guess what? We're going to meet and we're going to talk about what they've learned.
That was your classroom, Brandon.
Yep.
What was going on?
So what you saw was a variety of students working at their own pace on different programs, focused on something that they could learn at their level. So particularly we were focusing on fractions, but you saw some students that were working on the floor, you saw some students sitting traditionally at a computer, some students sitting at a desk, and what I really loved about that is it was quiet, students were learning, and students were learning in a way which was non-threatening. And when I think about where I work, a lot of times students come to school with a fear about learning. And when I tried to teach them traditionally in a classroom where there was 20 of them, they all had to learn this information at one time, there was a fear. And so when I started to shift and created this new way of kind of instructing, allowing kids to go through information at their own pace, it was amazing to see the differences.
So the results have been fantastic as far as you're concerned?
Definitely. As you can see, it's been quiet. And that's one of the biggest things that I didn't have in my classroom.
I saw it was quiet, but I also noticed that every student had a laptop. I don't see that in a lot of classrooms that I visit.
Definitely. So we started off, I didn't have one-to-one devices. It was about 8 computers in the classroom. And over about a 2-year period, I was able, through various funders, to get one-to-one devices in my class.
And that is something that Superintendent Dance has become known for in Baltimore. I've heard you talk about this for years, before it was in vogue, before Bill Gates started talking about personalized learning and individualized learning, before it became the buzzword that everyone is talking about. You were talking about training teachers to use the technology and getting the technology into classrooms. How has that worked in Baltimore?
I will tell you, it's good to be here and just hearing the stories of Brandon and other teachers who've created these cultures of risk-taking in their classrooms, but have really operationalized personalized learning for young people. And that's the impetus behind Students and Teachers Accessing Tomorrow, which is our major theory of action for Baltimore County Public Schools. To put it in perspective, we have 175 school centers and programs with 111,000 students in Baltimore County.
And how many laptops?
We're going to have 111,000 laptops in our school system over the next couple of years. We've worked with our local funding authority and our state funding authority to actually build a case for why. And so we started bringing our personal stories as parents, but we had students come to the table talking about the opportunities that could exist by leveraging technology. If you're going to make good on personalized and a customized learning experience for kids, there's no way you can do it without leveraging technology when it's appropriate. I go back to my own individual, experiences in the classroom, and I had in some cases 34 kids in a classroom. How do you personalize learning with 34 kids in a classroom unless you create a student-centered classroom like Brandon has done? So the video that you just saw, you would go into any Baltimore County elementary school, and now we're moving into middle school and then ultimately high school, and you will see classrooms that look just like that. You may not see a quiet classroom, but you will see kids on the floor, outside, taking ownership in small groups. They may be teaching each other, but the teacher really at that point goes into a facilitator mode.
As they get older, how do you make sure they're not on Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, the internet, and doing other things aside from those fractions and the things that you want them to be learning?
Absolutely. Kids are doing that now. If we were completely honest, kids have their cell phones out in classrooms now, whether you have a cell phone policy or not. This is where the onus goes into educators really thinking about the curricula, the content, the resources. What is it that we want kids to know and be able to do through technology? And I'm a firm believer that if you have an engaging curricula, quality digital content, but then you really build in choice and ownership in your classrooms, kids aren't going to have time to think about Facebook and Snapchat at that particular moment. Or if they are incorporating it into the lesson, they're doing it most appropriately. One of the things that I get concerned about as a parent, and definitely as an educator, is how do you build a quality digital footprint for students at an early age? We just launched Growing Up Digital within Baltimore County Public Schools to get our students to understand that it's their responsibility, coupled with us, to build a responsive digital footprint, because there's so many times when we go to hire teachers or another type of employee, we do a Google search and unfortunately something comes up to prevent that. We don't want our students to be in that same boat.
Well, it's very interesting when you were talking about how all of the students were engaged and all of the students were learning. These are kids who've grown up with technology. In many cases, you may be finding they're more advanced than the teachers. That happened in Los Angeles when they tried to introduce one-on-one laptops. In 3 seconds, the kids had figured it out, broken the code before they'd even opened the boxes, and it turned out to be something of a disaster. How do you make sure your teachers are trained to use this technology in ways that are really helpful?
So for me, it was about, again, building the curricula first. So back in the 12-13 school year when Maryland was shifting over into the new state college and career ready standards, it was about curriculum redesign. Our teachers began writing curricula for each other. So based on us redesigning our curricula, then we started leveraging technology in order to be able to do that. The other thing we did was our teachers got their devices first. And even though we were rolling out elementary, middle, and ultimately high school, every single teacher, almost all 9,000, got them exactly at the same time. It was the summer of 2013. It was all about how do we make sure that they are prepared for the curricula shift so that when kids get it, they're already well on their way in terms of transitioning their classrooms. But if you don't lead with curricula first, really think through what an instructional conversion looks like, and then the assessment conversion, and then professional development, having quality PD in your schools. And in Baltimore County, we have a full-time professional development teacher in every single school that we call a STAT teacher who really works with teachers on developing student-centered learning environments and then coupling technology in that when it's appropriate.
Brandon, what about in the classrooms you're in? Have the teachers resisted technology at all? How do they feel about it? You seem to love it because you've been a teacher for 4 or 5 years now, and you've experienced what it was like without it and now with it. I imagine you don't want ever to have those laptops taken away from you.
Oh, never.
But what about some of the other teachers you work with, and maybe people who've been teaching 20, 30, 40 years? Are they as comfortable with having that kind of technology in the classroom?
So I would say you definitely have to know your staff. So, of course, I've only been teaching about 5 years, and I'm a younger person, so I grew up in an age where technology was somewhat incorporated into the environment. But yes, when you do have teachers that have been teaching for 25 years and aren't as well versed with technology, it can be something of a fear for them, but you have to really know where they are, and you meet them where they are, just like you would with the students. And so, similar, we had professional development that was provided by Education Elements, which was a design company that would come in and they would teach us how to use the software, as well as giving teachers the opportunity to interact with the software on their own, which made them much more willing to interact. Now, you still always have people that are resistant, and that's just because fear, but I think as long as you give them the opportunity and you give them the space to learn it in a way which is non-threatening, then they're more inclined to use it.
Superintendent Dance, your school district looks like few in this country. It's really out there. There's a lot of schools that I've been to that they're still struggling to get internet availability, and they don't even have anywhere near that level of equipment or training. When you give advice to other school districts, how do you suggest that they get up and running the way Baltimore is, and how can they do it?
So I think that educators lead with a moral imperative about doing this work. We lead from an equity lens regardless. I think that's the only way our nation's public schools are going to thrive and actually be great incubators for our nation's economy. You lead with equity based on making decisions if they were for your own kids. And so as educators, we have to build a case for why with our individual communities. All politics are local. And just like in Baltimore County, where our funding comes from our local and our state elected officials, we had to build a case for why we wanted to go this route. So when we had our community meetings and we started talking to folks, equity was a centerpiece of our agenda. And I just kept talking to folks about if we're going to level the playing field for all kids and eliminate the achievement gap, which we know does not start in middle school or high school or even before kids walk in the door, when they're at kindergarten, we have to leverage technology in order to be able to do so, but we have to build a culture that's really based on learning. And to get into Brandon's earlier point, we wanted to spend a lot of time on change management and really building this culture with our principals and teachers that it's not about the evaluation, but it's all of us growing and making sure that we learn this together.
Can you both give me examples of how technology is driving the achievement of your students or not? Do you have any evidence or data that shows that since you introduced all these new technological tools into your classroom that students are performing better? Brandon, want to start with?
So I would say that I think that we always want to start with the concrete point, so we always want to look at data. But I would say that you got to give the technology time to perform. So I'm in year 2 of hopefully what's going to be a year 5 of blended learning of innovative practice in my classroom. And so that we're still evolving the practice. But what I will say, the difference that I see, which is distinctly different from most classrooms, is kids love to come to my class. And I would love to say it's just me. They'd love to see my beautiful face. But we know that's not true.
It's not?
I hope so, But it's more or less because there's two things that has changed in my classroom. It's choice and it's voice. Students feel that once they have a choice in what it is that they're doing, and they have a voice in telling me when to do it and how they can do it, they're much more inclined to be part of that environment and want to have a say and take a vested interest in that environment. And so I would say that we are still growing in our understanding of what blended technology, what blended learning is going to look like in our school, but I would say that it is working because what we were doing before wasn't servicing kids in the way in which I thought was most beneficial.
So if you were to ask me and I'd say, let's go to the voices of students, I'd say absolutely yes. In Baltimore County, we bookend. So when I first got to Baltimore County, we focused on how do you make sure you leverage technology to ensure that every single kid has an opportunity to graduate. So we had students who were failing courses because of missing days for whatever reason, but knew the course material. We were able to use technology by giving them access for credit-bearing opportunities through online credit recovery. So then we were able to...
Can you explain what that credit recovery is? I don't think everybody knows what that is.
So this was an opportunity for us to take courses that our students had already taken, but to do it in a blended learning model where they had teacher support during the day, but they also were able to go home or even during the school day, complete those courses. High school students were in some cases completing courses up until the hour before graduation because we gave them an opportunity.
I bet that upped graduation rates.
Well, it moved our graduation rate from 84% when I got there to 88% right now. But that's what I'm not, I don't brag too much about that. I brag about the fact that if you look at our African American and our white student graduation rate, there's a 0.7% differential when it was a 7% one when I first got there 4 years ago. But then you take it to elementary grades, and we just most recently looked at the academic growth memo where our students right now in grades K through 8, they take their MAP assessments. They take it 3 times a year, and it measures their growth 3 times a year across 5 million kids across the country. And right now, because of our model that we've used in elementary school, our students are growing almost 1.5 times the rate of their national peers. I can't say that's because of technology alone. I think it's a multitude of different things we're doing, focusing on school progress planning, focusing on the social and emotional elements of kids. But we have gotten very serious about giving kids access to technology, which creates engaging classrooms, creates student choice in the classroom. And let me tell you, there are elementary kids who go home and talk about how involved they are in their classrooms. You don't see that in too many classrooms.
Do they get to bring those laptops home, or do they fold them up at the end of the day and put them back?
So at our elementary grades, most students leave them at school, but in the middle school, we actually just launched a program so students are having the opportunity to take those laptops home through a program that we have funded through the districts.
Brandon, you mentioned that some of them were afraid to come to school before they had this program called Personalized Learning, which sounds like having a personal shopper. Tell us what you mean by personalized learning for those who may not know. This is a term that everyone's going to start hearing a lot more about if you're not already hearing it.
So it was funny, about 3 years ago, I went to a summit, Education Innovation Summit, and they talked about Starbucks. So Starbucks, when you go to Starbucks, there are all these brands of coffees, and when you come in, you can get whatever flavor, whatever style that you want. And so to me, that was the first idea of me really understanding what personalization was. It was getting what it is that you want, when you want it, and how you want it. So when I order it, I want that to be here. So essentially, personalization is allowing for a student to have an education where it is personalized, tailored to their needs. So if a student is more inclined to want to use technology, then they can use technology. If a student is more inclined to want to still go to pen and paper, they still have access to that. But it's really just looking at education in a way which is best going to suit that student.
So does Baltimore County Schools look like a Starbucks these days?
It depends on who you ask. We're moving a very massive organization, and it's change management throughout the entire board where, I have schools that are A+ schools who are knocking it out the park, but we have schools who are saying we're working on it and we're growing. Every single school knows that they're moving, though, toward that personalization for kids. But, we're talking about the personalization of the learning experience. Break out of the math class, the science class, the English, the history, where kids are thinking about, information in silos. They have access to the information. What should the experience look like for a 6th grader, for a 9th grader? And those are the types of conversations that we're having.
What's interesting is neither of you were educated with these techniques or this kind of technology. It's not in your childhood, it's not in your memories, correct? So in some ways you're pioneering it, correct?
There's a lot of research that's been out there for almost the last 20 years, whether school systems have implemented learning labs, or they've gone one-to-one and they've purchased devices and so forth. I think what we've done in Baltimore County is we've taken that research that's been out there for almost 20 years. We've looked at what's worked, what's not worked. Interestingly enough, I was a teacher in Henrico County back in 2001, where we had a one-to-one initiative in grades 3 through 12. And we've been able to take those personal experiences, people on the team who are parents, who were teachers in a one-to-one, looking at research research and say, what works for us? That's how we came up with the 8 different conversions that are all available on our website that talks about the changes in curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional development, policy, budget, communications, and really making sure how do you make it work in a system our size.
So you're both big fans of this. Very big fans of personalized learning. I would like to bring in some questions from the audience at this point, but also I would like, if you could maybe, Brandon, explain real quickly, you did a great job helping us understand personalized learning. What about blended learning? Is it the same thing? Is it different? Because we're hearing personalized learning, individualized learning, student-centered learning, outcomes-based learning, standards-based learning. There's a lot of learning.
Yeah, so
blended learning?
Yes, so I would say that the terminology is still being evolved as I guess our society is. So the personalization is more or less looking at the learning experience and tailoring it to what that student's needs is, whereas a blended type of learning is taking technology and figuring out how to support and enhance the learning experience through adaptive technology. So programs such as iReady or ST Math, Lexia, things of that nature.
Great. Do we have some questions from the audience? I see down this way.
Hi, I have a question up here at the top. Two things I wanted to know. Number one was, can you talk a little bit about your baseline data? So what were your students' achievement rates before you started, or even your first year in using this technology program as compared to, year 2? And then the second question I have for you is thinking about like this personalized learning, blended learning environment. How are you ensuring that your students are being creators of technology as opposed to consumers?
So if I go first, Maryland's in a unique spot to where we were transitioning from our former state assessments to the PARCC test. So last year, of course, because PARCC was a brand new test, it was a baseline year, there were some inconsistencies with the data based on whether students took the test on a computer versus paper or pencil. Maryland is going through the second year of PARCC now also, where we've gone from having 2 testing windows to 1. So one of the things I've had to push on folks is let's look at qualitative data from our teachers in terms of the implementation of it, qualitative data from our students, but also looking at our MAP data too in terms of growth. We've really changed our mindset from proficiency to growth. And what we've seen from our baseline year when we first started it to this year is that we've seen kids grow at an exponential rate in our elementary schools. I think in terms of having them to create with us and to innovate with us as our students, it has to be built into the curriculum. It has to be built into those activities and experiences we want students to know and be able to do, and to have them be able to talk about it and model it based on the curriculum where they can actually look at it from an interdisciplinary approach.
Yeah, and I want to touch more on the second question. I think that what you have to do fundamentally is that you have to make students part of the innovation that's happening in the classroom. So as much as Dan said, is that whenever you're rolling out a new system, another point of technology, you have to give students the opportunity to speak about that and to really give your feedback on whether they like it or not. Because truth is that you can spend money, thousands of dollars or millions of dollars investing in a program, but if it's not something that kids enjoy doing, you're fundamentally not going to get the same results that you want to get.
Next question, please.
Yes, my question is for Brandon. With the advancement of technology and blended learning and everything, how do you see the teacher training programs changing, and how do you see teachers being trained on blended learning?
So I think this is something that programs have not necessarily started to think about, but as it's becoming a bigger thing, it's something that they have to think more intentionally about. So I would say that more teacher training programs are going to start having to use blended learning technology as part of their teaching curriculum, and then also provide it as part of their actual curriculum that they fuse out into the classroom. I think there's a lot of changes that still need to happen, and to speak more onto that point, I would just have to think a little bit further about that.
So if I can just quickly add to that, this is where I have to give a major shout out to the University System of Maryland and Towson University. I think in order to prepare our teachers, it can't be done always on a university campus. And in Baltimore County, we partner with Towson University to where kids are doing courses at Towson University, but they're also doing it at some of our schools too. They're getting the theory from their professors, and they're going out and doing classroom observations, and they're coming back to talk about it. In addition, we're helping them to redesign their curriculum and their courses so that technology is not a standalone course, but that technology is blended into every single course that students are taking to get their teacher certification.
Great. I believe we do not have time for any more questions at this point, but I want to thank these great panelists for giving us a lot to think about way in the future.